Are you someone dealing with tank anxiety? Maybe you're thinking about picking up tank as a starter role, or you know someone that this video could help. Well, hopefully I can tell you how to handle tanking in Final Fantasy XIV. I'm gonna be explaining the basics of how to tank, what you're expected to do in the context of a dungeon, a trial/normal raid, and also alliance raids. So at the end of this video, you'll understand how the tanking experience plays out in FF14, and will make you ready for all kinds of challenges the game has in store for you. If you're wondering if I'm gonna go super deep or gonna be tackling some complex things, don't worry, I'm going to only talk about the level 50 experience, which will be enough information that will help you through every expansion. This video is being made before Evercold releases, where most classes, including tanks, might play differently in comparison to what we have right now. Hopefully the tanks won't change too much, but if they do, I'll update this video. But without further ado, let's talk about how tanking works in Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV tanks plays pretty similarly when it comes to reducing incoming damage, which means that if you pick up, for example, Warrior, most of the knowledge you learn from Warrior can be applied to, for example, Paladin. But every tank has some unique damage reduction skills that are unique to the class, but from now on, I'm gonna be calling them defensives, as that's what these skills tend to be referred as. I'll be tackling how a dungeon usually goes as a tank, as that is the most important thing to learn as a beginner tank. Once you get into a dungeon, your main objective as the tank of the party is to first activate your tank stance, as that will allow you to grab the attention of nearby enemies and start running in front of your party while attacking any enemy you come across, mainly by using your area of effect skills, aka your AoEs, repeatedly, as that will guarantee that the enemies will never look away from you. The amount of enemies you're supposed to grab depends not only on the dungeon, but also on your team's performance. If you have a newish healer in the party, grabbing tons of enemies might be quite challenging for them to keep up, but other times you might be able to pull from one point to the end of the dungeon and have no problems. That type of pulling is called a wall-to-wall pull. A pull which is the biggest type of enemy pull that you can do in FF14 dungeons. As you round your mobs up, you'll start your defensive rotation, which every tank has a 10% defensive, a 20% defensive, and a 30% defensive with varying cooldown timers. So what we want to do is rotate between them to reduce as much incoming damage as possible, but not outright use them all, as that will leave you without defensive skills for the next pack of enemies. So the order of cooldowns you want to use is by starting with the strongest defensive you have, which in this case it would be your 30% damage reduction defensive, which will last you 15 seconds. While that is active, you'll want to just keep using your AoE skills until the mob is dead. If the group of enemies isn't yet dead, you can use your 10% damage reduction skill to mitigate the little damage you are taking. The less damage you take, the more damage the healer can do, which makes enemies die faster. As in this game, healers aren't only meant to keep you alive, they are also responsible with dealing damage alongside the DPS. If the group of enemies you have is so small that the damage they are doing is pretty insignificant, you can skip using 10% damage reduction and save it for the next pull, as your 30% defensive is still on cooldown. Once you get to the next mob pull, you'll be using your 20% damage reduction skill while weaving your 10% defensive if the mob pull requires it or not. Eventually, you'll reach a boss arena, where each dungeon has at least 3 bosses per dungeon, with a few exceptions here and there. But once you get in, what you'll want to do is point the boss away from the party, as some bosses have attacks that cleave in front of them, keeping your party safe and also allow your DPS players to land their positionals, aka attacks that deal more damage if they are performed behind the target or on the sides of the target. So once you make the boss look away from the party, you will want to stay still so the DPS can continue doing their damage rotation without being in danger of being hit. And just like that, you know how to tackle every dungeon in the game, as each and every dungeon is a linear experience that has the same format, a few mob pulls in a hallway before reaching the boss. Once the boss is defeated, you'll have another hallway with enemies and then a boss at the end of the hallway. This is the format that you can safely expect in every dungeon in the game, even with alliance raids, but I'll get to that in just a second. So before I continue, consider liking and subscribing if this has been useful and an enjoyable watch so far. This tells me and YouTube that this video is worth making. Also, if you want to watch extra FF14 content like challenge runs, consider checking my channel. You might find some new fun stuff to watch. But with all that said, let's continue and talk about how trials in FF14 work whenever you're tanking. There isn't too many new things to learn when it comes to tanking, so you can rest easy that the information you have learned on how to tank dungeons will also translate incredibly well into trials. But first things first is that trials has a team composition of 4 DPS, 2 healers and 2 tanks, and if you're wondering why there is need for 2 tanks, it's because one tank will act as a main tank while the other will act as an off tank. And don't worry, I'll be explaining to you what is the difference between the two. A main tank is pretty simple. The main tank job is to be the one taking the enemy's attention, in this case, the boss. So while you have the attention of the boss, make sure you have the boss look away from the party, allowing the DPS to have access to the back and the sides of the boss safely. Once you have done that, you continue with your damage rotation and defensive rotation. So the information you learn on how to handle bosses in a dungeon will apply to how you tank a trial boss. Now let's talk about how an off tank works in a boss fight encounter. While the main tank has the attention of the boss, you're gonna be sitting, usually near the main tank. And the main reason behind it is that your job is to support the main tank and the party. All you need to know, as an example, is that every tank has access to a skill called Reprisal, aka the 10% damage reduction I have been telling you about throughout the video. And that is the only skill out of the 3 that you can actually apply to an enemy that reduces the damage it does, allowing you to use it on the boss whenever it's preparing a big party-wide damage or a big attack aimed towards the main tank. Another thing that the off tank is supposed to keep in mind is when the main tank dies, because you're the second in aggro, you will be going to the main tank position and will start your tank defensive rotation, jumping between your 10, 20 and 30% damage reduction skills. Other than that, how you approach the fight is pretty similarly to how you handle a boss fight in a dungeon, so let's move to the final thing to learn, which is alliance raids. The difference between a dungeon or a trial is that an alliance raid has a max of 24 players in an instance. To be exact, it's 3 teams of 8 players that form the 24 players, and instead of each team having 2 tanks, each team has 1 tank. So in the alliance raid, there will be 3 tanks, and I'll explain how usually things work. Each server has different rules on who tanks the alliance raid, and I sadly don't know the information for each and every server, how they approach main tanking alliance raids, but usually whoever goes out of their way to provoke the enemies and bosses first tend to remain as main tanks. So if someone in the alliance raid pulls the enemies first, you'll be acting as an off tank. There's usually tons of different enemies in alliance raids that are supposed to be tanked by off tanks, especially some boss fights will require the help of the off tanks to manage while the main tank is taking care of the boss. But if you're wondering that's the only way tanking works in an alliance raid, I'm here to tell you about a major aspect of alliances, which is the forked paths that each team must separate and go into each corner. Whenever you go into your own path, you'll treat tanking like normal, like from a dungeon or trial, until you reunite with the other team. So real quick, to know where you have to go whenever the path forks and you need to separate from the other teams, I'll quickly tell you how to decipher where to go, as the game doesn't tell you how it works. Whenever you join an alliance raid, you'll be put into one of 3 alliances, either A, B, or C, and whichever alliance you are part of is the path you will be taking. For example, envision this: A, B, C. A is left of B, so you go to the left path. B is between A and C, so you go into the middle path. And C is to the right of B, so you go to the right path. This applies to most alliances and boss encounters, so paying attention to which alliance you're a part of will allow you to move alongside your team. Other than this, you know how alliances work, and for that matter, you know how tanking works in the game. There's one extra final tip I'll tell you about before you go off tanking, and it's that arm's length is secretly a defensive skill. because every time you get hit by a normal enemy and not a boss, you will slow their attack speed by 20%, which indirectly gives a 20% damage reduction, but sadly bosses are immune to slows. Most tanks don't know about this, so by using this skill aggressively in dungeons will already make you so much tankier than most players. There's some extra tips I could give away about other tanks and their defenses, but this video is already longer than I wanted it to be. But if you have other tips you want to share with the other players, be sure to leave it in the comments. And if you want me to make a video about the other tanks, be sure to let me know. Hopefully this was a helpful video and gets you ready to tank in the game. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, not only to tell me to make more videos like this, but also to show YouTube that this video is worth being shown to other gamers. And with that, this will be for today's video. Thank you so much for watching till the end. You're one of the few gamers that gets to this point, so genuinely thank you, and I hope you had fun watching. I want to thank these wonderful people on screen right now. Thanks to these generous and wonderful people, I'm capable of experimenting and branching out with different FF14 videos and different MMO games. If you want to be able to support me directly, you can become a YouTube member or a Twitch sub. By supporting the channel like this, you'll gain access to exclusive videos only available to supporters. But with all that said, I hope you're having a wonderful day and I'll be seeing you on my next video.